Following a strange and unexplained death in Oxford, creepy surveillance footage of a hooded figure began to appear all over the city. Jorge's death was initially deemed to be a tragic accident, but 2 years later, a tip from the other side of the world triggered a manhunt for a seriously sick and twisted individual. And the more detectives tucked into this case, the more horrific it became. So, who is Scarlet Blake? Why is she referred to as the so-called cat killer? And how is she related to Jorge's untimely murder? Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today I'm taking you to Oxford to look at one of the most angering stories that I've ever encountered. You know, every once in a while, a story like this comes up, and it angers you so much that it feels personal. And this one will outrage you until the very end, so make sure you have your comforts with you. Please consider subscribing if you want to see more stories like this every single week. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, pull up a seat, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Scarlet Blake. Now here's a place I know extraordinarily well. Welcome to Oxford, folks. Nestled in southern England's serene countryside, Oxford shines as a hub of English intellect and culture. Its well-known university, which was founded in the 12th century, epitomizes academic excellence. Wandering its historic streets, you will be mesmerized by timeless architecture and iconic college spires. But Oxford isn't just about its traditional academia, as the city is also alive with artistic vibrancy. Its many theatres, galleries, and museums are rich with history, all of which are surrounded by lovely markets, cozy pubs, and dozens of quaint coffee shops. With a rich history, culture, and so many things to see, it is no wonder why Oxford is internationally recognised, and it's a place I'm very proud to call my childhood home. However, that is not to say that it is free from disaster, and sure enough, in the year 2021, a horrific death became the talk of the town. At 12:15 PM on July 26, 2021, emergency services were dispatched to Parsons Pleasure bathing place found along the River Sherwell. Several calls had been made to report a body floating in the water, and those observing the situation were certain that, whoever it was, they were dead. The local area was locked down as soon as officers arrived, and soon after this, the body was confirmed to belong to a man in his 20s or 30s. The cause of his death was initially unknown and unexplained, meaning that officers were not sure if this was accidental or if it were a homicide. Soon enough, detectives were able to locate various clues which indicated that foul play may have been involved. However, for now, they weren't quite certain. But soon after these initial findings, that is when they found this surveillance image. Investigating officers believed that, due to their proximity at the time of this man's death, they may have seen him shortly before he died. But with no idea who this person could be, they released the image to the public for help. So, now we have a body appearing in a public place in downtown Oxford, and a surveillance image of a hooded figure taken shortly before his death. And so the authorities had several big questions that really needed to be answered here. Who were these two people? How did that body end up in the river? And who was the poor guy? As always, these things unfortunately take quite a lot of time to develop, but what the police were able to determine is that that body belonged to a man named Jorge Martin Carreno. His next of kin were notified within 24 hours, and sadly, so began their long road to recovery, and many questions on what happened to their beloved Jorge. But before we begin our investigation, let's take a look who Jorge was and what precisely went down. This unfortunate soul was a 30-year-old man from Spain named Jorge Martin Carreno. Born in Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, he migrated to the UK with his girlfriend in 2019, and although they separated soon after, they remained good friends. Now, Jorge was an engineer by trade, and had studied electrical engineering at university, and at the time of his death, he was working at one of Oxford's local BMW production plants. In fact, on the evening before he died, he'd been drinking with with colleagues before being separated from the group and making his way back home. Jorge's family described him as distinguished by his incredible affection, friendliness, and ability to give himself entirely to others. And his innate curiosity and creativity drove him to tirelessly explore, learn, and experiment. Jorge loved music, photography, reading, and sports. And he also played the guitar and often attended art museums with his friends. And being a triplet, he has left behind 2 identical brothers in a large grieving family. So, now they had a face and a name to the body, they could finally take a look at what precisely happened to him on the night that he died. And of course, they would begin with surveillance footage, cell phone data, and witness reports. The ominously sad thing is that, not even a few hours before Jorge died, one of his friends sent him a message to say that Oxford is a dangerous place, and followed up by sending an article of an attempted murder. Now, growing up in Oxfordshire, I can attest that the countryside is a very peaceful place to be, but the city, perhaps not so much. Actually, when I was around 16 years old, my cousins and I were walking through the city when one of them was hit in the face with a brick by a bunch of other kids. So yeah, it can be pretty rough. Anyway, this is where our story starts to show subtle signs of foul play, because as investigators looked deeper and deeper into the case, they realized that Jorge was not alone in his final hours. In fact, plenty of surveillance cameras captured him with this mysterious figure. More than a dozen cameras, in fact. Jorge and this stranger were documented from various locations and angles, and walking along the many streets of Oxford. So, the main questions here are, who was this hooded and masked individual? Why were they with Jorge? And what happened between the 2 of them? On the evening of July the 24th, 2021, Jorge travelled to Oxford city centre with his friends. They travelled to the Swan and Castle pub before then moving on to the Cow and Creek at roughly 10 PM. At 1 AM, Jorge received a text from his friend warning him that Oxford is a dangerous place to be, before attaching a link to a story about an attempted murder in the city. Ominously, he would later reply to this with a smiley face emoji. At 2 AM, he then left the Cow and Creek and could be seen saying goodbye to his friends at 2:09. For the next hour, he remained in and around Oxford with other friends and eventually himself. At 3:16 AM, Jorge is seen leaning against a wall in Worcester Street while he searches for his address on his phone. And then, 4 minutes later, he is caught by another camera in Gloucester Green. He then tries to call a friend on his phone, but unfortunately the call is unanswered. After this, further searches are then made for his home address. At 3:33 AM, a surveillance camera captures Jorge accidentally dropping his wallet. And about 58 seconds later, he then walks back past it in the opposite direction. The man appears to be lost, and is still using his phone to search for his address. Meanwhile, our first surveillance camera captures the unknown assailant walking past South Lodge Park at 3:35 AM. At 3:59 AM, the unknown individual is then seen walking down Cat Street. Eventually, they then turn into Mary's Passage just seconds later. And then, at precisely 4 AM, our 2 characters finally cross paths. After the unknown person approaches Jorge, who is already down on the ground, they then sit down and chat for approximately 12 minutes before setting off together. Another camera then captures the 2 of them on Cat Street. At the time, it is unknown what their mutual intentions were, but Jorge had seemingly agreed to walk with this stranger. They are then seen walking together on South Parks Road and, eventually, at South Lodge Park. Now, this surveillance camera in particular is a mere few hundred feet away from the River Sherwell, and more specifically, the exact area where Jorge's body was found. The discovery of this footage, plus the realization that this stranger was with him a mere meters away from where he was found, was highly suspicious to officers. Which is great, by the way, because to begin with, everyone thought that his death was accidental. In fact, his initial autopsies concluded that he'd died from intoxication and then drowning. This was despite them recognizing that he had blunt force trauma to the back of the head. If Jorge's death was an accident, then he'd have had to fall backwards, knock himself out, roll over, and then drown himself. So yeah, none of this made any sense whatsoever. But this so-called accident would be the main story for quite some time. In fact, for more than 2 years. But then, finally, some fresh evidence came to light. Forensic officers would find a Smirnoff vodka bottle cap next to Jorge's body, and after analysing it, they found it contained his DNA and the DNA of another unknown individual. And after reviewing the surveillance footage more closely, they realised that the person walking around with Jorge that night seemed to be carrying that vodka bottle. And so, the next big question to the authorities was Jorge really killed? And if someone had planned to murder him, then why? The truth is, for a very long time, nobody knew what precisely happened to Jorge. And while his death did seem suspicious to many, they had no solid evidence, or even a person of interest for that matter. The city of Oxford would soon return to business as usual. Those walking around at night soon forgot about the strange death by the river, and the hooded figure seemed to slip out of the minds of almost everyone. Meanwhile, back at home in Spain, Jorge's family were left with open wounds and relentless questions. Tragically, that would remain the case for over 2 years, until one day, the authorities received a strange phone call. The caller was a trans woman from the United States, and she was calling to report that her partner, who lived in Oxford, had recently admitted to murdering a man. So, her partner's name is Scarlet Blake, and let me tell you, we will be learning a lot about Scarlet over the next 10 minutes. Because, quite frankly, this is one seriously messed up individual. So, let's begin with their relationship. Ashlyn Bell, who lived in the US, was in a relationship with Scarlet Blake, who was 23 years old at the time of Jorge's murder. Scarlet is also a trans woman, and lived on Crotch Crescent, which is in the same area where Jorge's body was found. After finding each other over the internet, the two struck up an online relationship, and it seems that both of them shared some rather sick fantasies. Ashlyn claimed that Scarlet had a morbid interest in killing living creatures, and that, furthermore, they would fantasize about murdering animals and other people. And furthermore, Ashlyn told the authorities that Scarlet had confessed to murdering Jorge with a garrote before throwing him into the river. Sadly, this story gets even worse. In March of 2021, Scarlet's neighbors became worried when their cat suddenly disappeared. You can likely tell where this is going, but the long story short is that Scarlet is to blame. After buying a cat trap and cat food, she eventually caught the unlucky feline. Now, I need to be quite vague with the details here, but after capturing the cat, she bought a camera, a tripod, and studio lights. And after that, she murdered the cat while live streaming it to Ashlyn. This included dissection, skinning, decapitation, and then even using a blender. Now, I'm going to be quite honest with you here, but after reading all of the details of this case, and more specifically what happened to that cat, I did really struggle to finish this one. Many of you know about Nero and how much he means to me, and the idea of being able to do such evil things to an animal just really sinks my stomach. Although the world is slowly waking up to cats and the actual depth of their capabilities, many people still don't understand how intelligent, friendly, adaptable, and lovable these animals can be. Humans and cats have been companions for as long as 12,000 years. Initially utilized to defend humans from rat and mouse infestations, cats are now commonly adopted for companionship. Better seen as tiny roommates who love their own space, most will still appreciate being in the same room as you. And if you raise them correctly, well, let me tell you, you've got a friend for life. As some of you will already know, Nero spends most of his days next to me on my desk, on my lap, or beside me at night. And even if he's not the sharpest crayon in the box, he sits, does tricks, and tries to mirror my behavior. So, with that said, you can probably understand how much this fucker angers me. Revealing this information to the authorities was a massive blow for Ashlyn, as she would confess that she was part of the problem. In fact, that livestream was a birthday present to her. But she also knew that, at her own expense, coming forward was instrumental in convicting Jorge's killer. Within this livestream, Scarlet was seen smiling and laughing while murdering the cat, and also confessed that she would love to do this to a human one day. To make things even more twisted and incomprehensible, it was soon learned that Scarlet had even adopted the persona of a cat, and would often meow at friends and family. And if that wasn't enough already, she had even found a pet microchip, added all of her personal details to the nation's animal database, and then inserted that microchip inside one of her breasts. Now, all of this is incredibly sick stuff to even think about, let alone commit, but Ashlyn claimed that all of it were true. And even worse, she had the evidence to prove it. As you already know, Jorge walked the dark streets of Oxford with this mysterious figure in a hooded jacket. Well, at 2:30 AM that very same morning, and a mere couple hours before his death, Scarlet sent a picture of her wearing the very same jacket to Ashlyn. In fact, just moments later, she then set off to find and kill Jorge in the same clothing. This jacket was then sent to Ashlyn Bell in the United States, where officers would soon recover it for examination. Rather disgusting side note, it had Ashlyn's semen all over it. And so, with all of this information now in the hands of the authorities, they decided to pay Scarlet Blake a little visit and finally arrest her. Even still, she would complain about being grumpy and having to give up smoking.
Negative patches or something?
They can do that. So what we've got here is we've got a healthcare professional, so basically a nurse at custody. If you're, for instance, you need nicotine, then I think they've got those. Do they not? Oh, maybe they don't.
It'd be nice, but...
I know they used to, but I think they stopped that, the double check. Like, for some reason I want to say they stopped.
Yeah, I'm probably just out of date with my information.
It's not that many, well, most of the vape nowadays, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I vape.
It's the little percentage of nicotine, isn't it?
It's not... it's not too bad. It's been a bit grumpy for a while, which is annoying, but I suppose... I don't know, I just, because like being arrested and also withdrawals
All at the same time.
Yeah, it's not a great concoction, is it?
best sort of combo. Yeah, could be worse though. At least it's not genocide.
That's right. She was then heard saying, "It could be worse, at least it's not genocide." Following Scarlet's arrest, many new details came to light. They would find many images on her mobile phone, including a picture of a handmade garrote, which she had made from 2 metal handles and piano wire, and a picture saying "bruise my esophagus," which was incorrectly spelt. Another picture shows a comic of a man and a cat talking while they clean up a murder scene, and another shows a first date with me starter pack, including a knife, gun, tape, and rope. A 5th photo was about a type of woman she's into, showcasing 2 women which have already appeared on this channel. It was soon learned that Scarlet's earliest premeditated actions began in January of 2021, when, at the time, she bought a humane cat trap from eBay. In February of 2021, she then bought a Smirnoff Ice vodka bottle. Authorities say that they later found the lid of this bottle next to Jorge's body at Parsons' Pleasure, and although it may not be the exact same lid, it at least confirms that Scarlet was a fan of Smirnoff. I mean, let's be real, choosing Smirnoff is a crime in itself, am I right? The following month, in March of 2021, Scarlet then purchased more than 100 pouches of cat food. And sadly, later that month, the family who owned the cat started posting missing cat posters in the neighborhood. At this stage, Scarlet and Ashlyn had been flirting with themes of murder for several months, and tragically, this would continue for several months more. On April the 6th, 2021, Scarlet then purchased herself some combat safety boots. Surveillance cameras confirmed that these boots were the ones worn on the night of Jorge's death. And then 1 month later, in May of 2021, she then bought black clothes dye and a Stanley multi-saw. As we know, at 2:30 on the morning of Jorge's murder, Scarlet took a picture of herself wearing a combat jacket before sending it to Ashlyn. She then set off into the darkness, looking for a drunk victim to be her prey. That is when she found Jorge on the ground at 4 AM, and sadly, the rest is morbid history. Jorge's family and friends were shocked, appalled, and even relieved to hear the news. Many of them believed that his death was not an accident, and so to put a name and a face to his killer was a very big step. However, this did reopen many wounds for the Carreno family. Many of them had been silently grieving his death for the last 2 years, and now, with Scarlet's trial on the horizon, they would have to revisit old feelings. Scarlet's trial began roughly 6 months later, where she would have to defend herself against a judge and a panel of 12 jurors. The prosecution built their case around a sadistic fantasist, one who seemed to mutilate a cat before then turning their attention towards a human. Her defense were a little weaker at the knees though, and they tried to claim that, although the story was not looking good for her, there was not enough evidence to prove that Scarlet murdered Jorge. While in court, Scarlet told the jury that apparently she was part cat, an alter ego of some sort, and that the cat part of a fragmented personality was always happy. There is a part that is just cat, and that is what the happy part of me is. In that, they come out when I am happy. With friends I know quite well, I meow at them in greeting. It is quite strange. It is very prominent when I'm expressing certain emotions. The cat has a pretty strong association with joy and, I suppose, innate goodness. It is a kind of childhood innocence. She then followed up by meowing at the jury. She also said, "I don't know how he died. I assume he drowned. It wasn't something I did. As to how, I still don't know. I wasn't there." The court learned that messages sent before and after July the 25th show that Scarlet and Ashlyn shared a prolonged obsession with harm and death. Scarlet would tell the court that she did not want to kill a living creature, let alone a person, and that, actually, it was Ashlyn who pressured her to do so. She further attributed her morbid interests to a split or dissociative personality, using the language of psychiatry to explain her behavior. Throughout their evaluations, psychologists did not find any mental illness, nor did Scarlet ever have any relevant mental illness or mental disorder in her past. She further denied murdering Jorge, and claimed that she left him near the park alive and well. And although she would eventually admit to murdering the cat, she claimed that it was to win Ashlyn's approval. Now, being blunt, Ashlyn clearly is a sick fuck, but she is not responsible for Scarlet's actions. It soon became clear to the prosecution that Scarlet's actions were strongly motivated by Netflix's documentary called Don't Fuck With Cats. Her livestream, which was carefully put together, featured the track True Faith by New Order, which can be found in the same documentary. The prosecution further suggested that on the night she murdered Jorge, she was carrying a murder kit, which included a garrote and leopard print dressing gown cord. No surprise though, Scarlet would deny all of these allegations. It was also learned that in the days after Jorge's murder, Scarlet took photos of the memorial left by his family and the tree next to which she had killed him. She then returned to the same spot 1 year later, where she took a photo of herself next to the tree. By now, she had broken up with Ashlyn, and during this time, she had boasted about murdering this man to her new partner. During her trial, the pathologist ruled out the possibility that Jorge died immediately after being strangled. Instead, there were 3 possibilities. He could have been strangled with a ligature or neck hold and then lost consciousness before drowning, have been knocked out unconscious with an object and then drowned, or have been held under the water until passing away. Now, it is true that a combination of 2 or more of these factors could have also caused his death, but the court heard that hemorrhages found within his facial tissues and at the base of his tongue cannot be explained if his death was an accident. Furthermore, if Jorge's death was theoretically an accident, then bruises on the back of his right shoulder and the left of his head could only have been sustained if he had fallen backwards, hit the concrete slab at the water's edge, and then rotated to be face down. In short, this simply being an accident was not adding up. None of this was good news for Scarlet's trial. Not that you would know how she felt, as she remained mostly emotionless throughout the entire process. At the end of her 3-week trial, the jury would only take a few hours to come to their verdict, and no surprise, they unanimously found her guilty of 1 count of murder. Scarlet Blake was therefore sentenced to life imprisonment, with 24 years behind bars before being eligible for parole. In addition to this, she was also given a measly 4 months for murdering her neighbour's cat, which, if you ask me, is despicably insufficient. Now, Parliament has recently increased the maximum sentence for animal cruelty from 6 months to 5 years. However, because Scarlet's actions occurred before this change was made, her sentence is based on old grounds. Following her trial, Jorge's family were relieved to hear the verdict, and so, in response, they released a statement to honour him. Today, his absence leaves a deep wound in our hearts. His life was stolen, cutting short his projects and dreams. This tribute is not just a reminder of Jorge, but also a call to justice. There can be no peace until justice is served. May this inexplicable loss drive us to a fight for a world where justice prevails, and where we can build a safer future for everyone. Every day, we will remember Jorge, his laughter, his joy, his zest for life, and of course, all those unforgettable moments we shared. Their extended tribute was beautiful to read. Jorge was marked as a man with a great sense of humour. He was kind, ambitious, and, above all else, an incredibly good person. Moving from Spain to the beautiful city of Oxford, he was on his own path in life, exploring various cultures and ways of living along the way. It was during his time out with friends, or colleagues who loved him enough to see him out of work, that he was taken advantage of, all for the sick profit of fulfilling an evil fantasy. As described by his family, his loss feels like a traumatic, devastating blow, leaving a void impossible to fill. When you think about it, Jorge's murder was so incredibly senseless and tragic. I mean, he didn't even know his killer a mere few hours before his death. And while I do believe in a world where all of us can be safe out at night, we still must exercise caution in public. And although these stories do tend to involve female victims, that does not mean that men are exempt. Anyway folks, I think I'll wrap this case up here today. Thank you so much for watching, I really do appreciate you being here. Before you go though, I do have 2 questions for you. To begin with, what do you think about this story? Because for me, I found this one to be so infuriating. And the second question is, what did you think about the style of this video? I tried to do a few things differently here, including script structure, change of music, and a few other small effects, so with that in mind, what are your thoughts? If you'd like to support me in the channel, check out my Patreon here, or alternatively, my social media here. Anyway folks, that is it today. Thank you again so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you again very soon for another one. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.